co-sponsors. I'll start out by introducing them in just a minute. Our update on public school, is going to be very enlightening for all of you. And if some of the legislation goes through, it's going to change a lot for public schools. So this is real serious business, and I want you to pay attention, real close, take notes, whatever you need to do. Write your questions down on your 3x5 cards, and we'll get the answers here in just a minute. How many of you have had a bake sale for schools or been involved in raising funds? Okay, well, that says a lot right there, you know. We have a lot of people that are contributing to this public school funding already and have been for years. So we put a price tag out there on the public school cookies, and how many of you dropped or wrote a check for 20 grand to give to the schools? Anybody? Yeah. Well, if you want to make a donation, we'll, take your money and we'll donate it to the public schools for sure. Phil Downs, hey, you got it. Great, good to know. All right. I want to take a minute to thank our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters, Cathy. Would you stand or raise your hand if you're in here? Maybe she's out there. I can't see. Yeah. Okay, and the NEIFPE, Friends in Public Education Northeast, please, Eileen Doherty, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Raise your hand or stand up. AAUW, who is here from AAUW? Please, all of his hands. And Coalition for Public Education Northeast. Noah Smith, I know, is representing it tonight, but I know a lot of you. How many of you are here from the coalition? Yes, very much. And last but not least, Allen County Democratic Luncheon Club, which I am a part of. Please stand up if you raise your hand. All right. Did I miss anybody? Thank you to all the volunteers today that we have not mentioned your names, and we know that we couldn't do this without you, and appreciate all the time and cookies that were baked and all the people putting that stuff up. So at this time, I would like to go to our next person, Anne, who will introduce our speakers.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming this evening. First, before I recognize our guests, I did want to recognize Representative Kyle Miller from District 82. I don't think I have any other public servants in the audience, but so I'll move on to our speakers. My friend Cathy Fuentes-Rohwer, I've known for probably 10 years as we have fought together to help save public education. She is the president of the Indiana Coalition for Public Education, and she has been a public advocate for like the 10, 12 years we've been fighting. She has 4 children who proudly went to public schools. She also serves on her school board for her district, Monroe County Community School Corporation. She has advocated for public schools around the state. She's advocated against high-stakes testing, against giving our schools letter grades. She's fought to keep public money in public schools. She has fought to fund public schools adequately and equitably. And so this is my friend Cathy Fuentes-Rohwer, And we also have Jennifer McCormick. Jennifer is the last elected superintendent of public instruction for the state of Indiana. Prior to that role, she was superintendent and as well as assistant superintendent at Yorktown Community Schools and a principal there as well. And she was also a special education teacher, so she has served many roles for public schools. Her degrees are from Indiana State, Ball State, and Purdue. So we're very excited to have her here this evening, and she's going to speak for us first.
So first of all, I want to thank all of you. Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. It is a beautiful day in Indiana. So to be actually sitting in an auditorium on a beautiful day in March, it says something about your commitment to kids. So thank you for being here. I thought I was getting hushed already. Can you hear me? Am I switching off? Good? This is exactly what you guys want to see tonight, isn't it? Where's my little GOP friend who follows me around? Where are you, James? Hi. You're not recording this, are you?
No. Taking notes. Might learn something.
I thought maybe you were going to record me, but that also tactfully. Okay, so a couple of things I'm going to cover this evening, and then Cathy's going to jump in as well. I'm going to cover the landscape of Indiana's education. I'm going to talk a little bit about legislation, and then Cathy's going to talk a lot about legislation. But before I get too far down the road, all the educators in this room, raise your hand. All right. Retired educators, raise your hand. Leave them up. Leave them up. Broadway community school administrators, there they are, go get them. We all need them to come back. So we still have that little shortage going on. So, landscape of Indiana. Here's where we are. We have been morphing and moving quite interestingly in Indiana, and it's not by accident. So we are following a playbook that many of you are now aware of. And I wouldn't have said that maybe 10 years ago, and I know Dr. Downs is here, and he probably would agree with this. For a while, we knew something was happening, we really couldn't put our finger on it, and then as we became better educated, so have all of you. So it's interesting how we're all starting to connect the dots. But it's such a moving target, and that game, the rules keep changing, that it's always good to come back and get information. But as I say, every time I talk to groups like this, it's one thing to be informed, it's another thing if you don't go inform others. So your responsibility is get informed, and then go inform others. If we don't, shame on us. Because we're hoping people will learn, but how do we expect them to learn? They're super busy. People are like, do they not read the newspaper? Do they not watch what's going on social media? The list goes on. No, they're busy. So it is helpful if we help connect the dots. So the landscape of Indiana has gone from innovation to competition, and now we're out for individualization. I want you to keep those in mind. When all this school choice stuff started happening, it was under the umbrella of, we're going to innovate. We're going to show traditional public schools how it's done with less money. We're going to innovate. Hence the birth of charters. That's how it came to be, innovation. Now remember, Indiana was unique in that we already had a couple of lab schools. I was right down the road from a lab school. They intervened with us this much. 0. That was the school we were supposed to learn from. And a lot of times they would send their staff to us, which was awesome, and I would have been happy to learn from them, but they were more of a learning lab with the university. But the innovation piece, there's so much potential. But what we quickly learned was that's not at all what that was about. Because it wasn't like we were seeing brand new, innovative practices. We were not seeing an amazing thing happen with a lot of our instruction. We weren't seeing a lot of the flexibility and assessment. Everything that we told, we're going to show you how this can be done. We didn't see it. We're still not seeing it. Our charters right now are at a 48% graduation rate. 48. 48. So then, We moved into competition where every parent has the right to choose, unless you're black, brown, LGBTQ, your parents are divorced, you're the wrong religion. So choice is for those, special ed, ELL. So you have a choice unless you fall into a category that they don't want you to have a choice. And if you don't believe me, you try to tell a private school that your admissions, application, and process must be public. Go find them. Good luck. I was on the receiving end of that, and having taught special education, having been a local superintendent, I understand when people would come to the Department of Education and talk to our team, and they were very confused. They're like, wait, I thought we could choose to go to this school and use a voucher, and that was a better fit for my child. And I'm like, yeah, not really. I mean, if you were suburban, white, wealthy, you're good. And you think it's just me saying that, you go look at the report that is mandated from the state of Indiana, from our legislative friends, which I agree, the report should be done. The problem is no one wants to do anything with the data that it's showing us. Because it is showing us that vouchers are a program for wealthy, white, suburban kids. Period. That's what it is. So when people are like, wait a minute, wasn't this innovation and the competition sold to us that we're going to save our black, brown, at-risk kids from these failing schools? If you look at the academic impact that is happening from choice in Indiana, we aren't seeing it. Now, some people want to believe it, and some people are trying to sell it because that's how they get people to the meetings, by giving them gift cards. They're trying to sell it. You look at what's happening. I think it is a total disservice to our black students, our brown students, and our students who fit under a special protection. It's a total disservice. But that's where the competition thing came in. Now, we are moving into the individualization, where everybody's out for their own. And we're going to do pods. We're going to do private tutoring. We're going to continue with the innovation and competition conversation, but we're moving into the individualization, unless you happen to fall under those special protections that we talked about, or you're minority, or you fall under some religion that someone doesn't really appreciate, or you happen to be LGBTQ. That's where we are now. And if you don't believe me, pay attention to legislation that I'm sure Cathy will have conversations about. That's the cycle we're heading. But how in the world do they set the picture, the whole picture of Indiana for that, when our traditional public schools are still at about an 89% graduation rate? Remember, charter's 48, traditional public ed 89, we still have room to grow, no one's pretending that we don't. And then you have privates that are sitting at 90, almost 91, which, awesome. We want all schools to be successful. But not at the expense of funding one heavily and the rest are suppressed. The people that should be panicked about what's happening are our charters. Because our charter schools, in my opinion, are going to be the ones that get squelched. And the private schools are going to be the ones getting all the selling. I don't know about all of you. I live in Newcastle, God's country. I live in Newcastle. I don't know about all of you, but I see commercials every 10 minutes about the charter schools being underfunded. Now, I don't know who can afford that, for one, but it's constant because I believe they know what's coming. With the budget right now, I want you to think about this. Traditional public schools budget, I have to cheat for a minute. I know we are at around, for the 2-year, remember when you pass the budget, it's 2 years, about 8%. About 8% increase. We are happy with an 8% increase. However, when you run that through a formula, that does not mean Fort Wayne Community Schools will see an 8% increase. That does not mean they're going to see a 2%. It works through the formula. That just means the pot of money going into that formula for traditional public schools is going to be at about an 8% over 2 years. We are happy again to see any increase. So to our legislative friends, yay. However, pause. To charter schools, now remember, traditional public, 8%. to the charter schools who are getting really noisy because they're quite upset what's going on with vouchers, they're staring at roughly a 22% increase. 22%. With a 48% graduation rate. Then you've got the vouchers that are staring at about a 9% increase. But here's the kicker with vouchers. They're also looking at a 70% increase in the pot of money. Because they've now deemed the voucher subsidy, which it is, call it what it is, the voucher subsidy is based on a person's level of poverty. So when I say it's a white, suburban, wealthy game, the threshold of poverty that is being discussed now, $220,000 for a family of 4. Now, I don't know about you. Last time I looked, that wasn't poverty. But that's the subsidy that they're qualifying under. Now, imagine if that pot of money went to childcare that benefited everybody. Imagine if that pot of money went to pre-K that would benefit everybody. Imagine what would happen if those surplus monies would go to the other ends of things for everyone in the state of Indiana, regardless of the type of school, so that when kids show up, they're potty trained, they know how to line up, they know their numbers from their letters, they understand colors, they understand their shapes, they are getting familiar with letters and sounds. Imagine. We are really pushing the science of reading at the State House. Imagine if kids had an earlier experience. And the people who find it not as important or they're not pushing it at the State House, it's because they have the means to get that for their own child. I was a working mom, but I figured out and had the means to do that so that my child had a good child care, a good pre-K, and then an excellent K-12 under a system that was very good for him. But I was fortunate. I'm also suburban, white, and we had 2 teaching incomes, which we weren't wealthy, but we had 2 teaching incomes. There's the difference. People who are like, that's a home issue. They need to figure it out at home. I've heard everything at that State House. Child care belongs in the home. That is a home issue. No, that is a Hoosier issue. Pre-K. Pre-K. Imagine if we put that money on the front end versus all the remediation and all the correctional services and all the support services needed, and people who don't want it haven't been in the school environment. We've lived it. We know what that looks like. You can identify when a child walks through kindergarten roundup and what experiences they've had and haven't had. It is completely obvious before they even sit down to work with whatever situation's going on in that district. Completely obvious. That's the difference. So for us as a state, which we're only one of few that don't put a huge investment, yes, it's an expense, but let's call it what it is, an investment on the front end, we are going to pay for that one way or the other on the back end. I, as a mom, would much rather see it on the front end. Intense reading is needed, intense math, intense writing skills. I mean, you all know this in this room. When was the last time you heard that conversation coming from the State House? We're talking about furries. Really? We're talking about litter boxes. Really? Really? I mean, we're talking about nonsense. And if there are cases that someone says happened in wherever land, out of state, but we're going to carry it to Indiana to cause disruption, how is that helpful? I wish furries was the name of a spelling program so we could at least talk about spelling. I mean, how is that helpful? It's not. Those who are trying to suppress the conversation about SEL, how is that helpful? I talked to employers, and every single one of them was like, thank you for what you and your team did when you were in office to push SEL and the behavioral piece. Because we know that kids need to understand what leadership means, what it means to be a good neighbor, what it means to have healthy friend relationships. That is part of life. That is your employers or your employee skills. but it's also just good, holistic child type of approach. There is no way I could have taught special education if someone said there is no SEL. Because so many of our students' parents relied on, we want them to be functioning in different environments. That, my friends, is social, emotional, behavioral type of learning. And it is a huge pocket of our students. Coming out of COVID, you still talk to schools and what they're going through, and it is a lot tied to social, emotional learning. When things are disrupted in a district by adults or by other children, it's disruption. It doesn't matter who's causing it. Innovative disruption is not disruption about furries. Innovation disruption is concrete and productive and efficient and effective, and there's tons of studies on it. It's not about you're hiding the litter boxes, or you're doing this to my kid, or Jennifer McCormick was a groomer. Stop. Stop. Not helpful. Not helpful. The landscape, many of you know, part of the plan, remember we're going from innovation, competition, individualization, the game plan, simple. Keep things changing. There's not a single mom that I've ever met that was like, I cannot wait for my child to get more testing. I can't wait for him to be taken out of instructional day to just test, test, test. There is a purpose to testing. I'm not saying there's not. There is a time and a reason, if purposely tied to opportunity, for testing. So I'm not anti-testing. The amount of testing that's happening is ridiculous. That instructional time should be preserved, and we as a state should try everything we can to preserve that instructional time. Because we can test, test, test all day long. You want to know what's happening to testing before we take this next round of testing? It's going like this. Any predictions what's going to happen in the next 2 years? It's going like this. So what do you think they're going to do? Their experiment and our choice is not working, and Notre Dame is speaking out, IU is speaking out, Purdue maybe now. They're starting to speak out. They're starting to speak out. So then they got to change the game. So that means the assessment's got to go. So if you're paying attention, that assessment is getting ready to change, and our curriculum. So for years we've said we have too many standards. They're this deep and they're this wide, and we've got 180 days and we've got a lot going on in those days. So we've said forever we've got to look at those standards. Now all of a sudden they're like, hey, we got to look at the standards. But guess what we just did? We just developed a multi-million-dollar test tied to the very standards. They're like, those aren't good anymore. Those aren't good anymore. Because when you change the standards, you have to change the test or it's not reliable and it's not valid. So it's all in a row, right? It all goes together, and that's not by accident. I would go to our legislators, I'm like, why are we spending money on this again? Well, we could be spending money on reading, on developing our educators. I'm not a big, preach this program and that's it, but it's about development. We could spend it on our kids with some opportunities and courses. There's a whole lot of ways we could spend that money. But to continually spend it on assessment is the name of the game. Why? Someone's getting rich. It's helping people keep power. That's what it is. But it's also about when it's going like this, you can't track data well because it's a moving target. Pay attention to the assessment, pay attention to the instructional piece, pay attention to the rhetoric coming out of that state house. It's all about disruption, but it follows no research practices about innovation disruption. Zero. Zero. And if someone's telling you it does, then they obviously belong at Harvard, Yale, Purdue, IU, Notre Dame, because they know way more than the researchers. It follows nothing. I want you to be aware, before I turn it over to Cathy, I know we're taking questions, 1008, those who have pension, or those who will, or who are paying into pension or using your pension, this is interesting. So 1008 is an ALEC bill. For those who know ALEC, it is a group that's very dedicated to the program of privatization and certain programs.
It's a template.
Yeah, it's a playbook. Now, who in this room has been to ALEC before? To the conference? It's brutal. It's brutal. When you sat through those and you're listening to those conversations, I mean, I had times where I look around the room and like, is this really happening? It's brutal. And I came from public education. We're from a real conservative part of the county. I'm fourth generation farm family. I got a solid education where I was from. My kid went through public education, my husband, but I also have friends and family that went through private. It's not about the type of school. It's about the ideology. It's about the ideology that they're preaching. That public schools are so bad that now we become, you got to arrest people for books. You got to arrest people because we're groomers. We're hiding everything from everybody. They've turned it into demonization of the public school. For what purpose? Unless you've been to those conferences, I don't want to hear anybody tell me they know exactly what's going on, because you don't. You don't. That's where that disruption piece comes in. That's where it comes in. 1008 with the pension is, it's called the they love that word, anti-ESG bill. So it's environmental, social, government. So they are saying that in the pension, MPERS, which is our state employees, cannot invest in something that would be relatable or investing into government, or I'm sorry, into environment, into social issues, into government. And so Texas tried this last year and implemented it. They lost $100 million. So we've got Mishler, thank God for Mishler right now. We've got Mishler and we've got Senator Holdman, and they have been committed to making sure that the teacher pension is healthy, not just for teachers, but for the entire state of Indiana. That's a problem if it's not. They've worked really hard to pay the debt off that was pre a certain year when things got a little changed, okay? They worked really hard, and now what they're saying is we're going to take more money away and cause you more problems. So I don't know if the Senate's going to bite on this. The initial fiscal on that we would be losing, this is taxpayer money, was 6.7, Leslie, help me out.
6.7 billion over 10 years.
6.7 billion over 10 years.
Is that a Senate bill? Or
That is a House bill. That's in the budget. That's 1001 or 1008.
okay.
Now they came back with an amendment and said, oh, it won't be that bad. It's only going to be a loss of about $5 million. No way, people. No way. Pay attention to that bill. Those are the bills that don't make sense. That's the anti-CRT bill of fiscal. It doesn't make sense, but by golly, it gets you votes. And by golly, it makes you an ALEC champion. Because it's happening in the ALEC states. There's no credibility behind it. People who are implementing it will tell you, they know exactly what they're doing with it. They think it's hilarious that these people are actually buying into it because they know exactly what they're doing. It's no different than the anti-CRT. They know exactly what they're doing. They are using people just to champion their message. Just champion their message with really nothing behind it. And they know it, and many of us know it. It's just a matter of when they retire from the House or the Senate when they can admit it. They know exactly what they're doing. But 1008 is something to pay attention to. Lastly, the reinventing high school. This is the third time in 5 years that we reinvented high school. Why are we having those conversations? Because we have to go like this. Remember, we have to say, oh, schools, everybody needs a great CTE program because not everybody needs to go to college. Which we've known that for years. Like, can we not find a good balance here of the kids who want to go to college and be great. For those who that's not appropriate or they don't want to, there's other avenues. There's two-year colleges, there's trade school, there's credentialing. Go do you. But what Indiana likes to do is everybody's got to go to college. Nope, just kidding. Everybody's got to go to CTE, so everybody built up their CTE programs, and now they're like, nope, just kidding. So now we're in this, we're not real sure where they're taking us, but the money's not flowing to represent that. So, when they don't know what they're doing, what do you think they do? We got to reinvent high school. We need time to think about it. Got to reinvent it. That is a total ALEC move. Total ALEC move. But they're reinventing high school because this has got to go like this. And they've done that, everybody's going to college, everybody's got to do CTE. And now they're like, now what? So they're going to take this time to figure it out. Now they're going to send the CTE monies that we just spent an enormous amount on our schools, flow that to businesses. They're also going to flow a lot of the money into more of a private, in my opinion, privatized school pods. So the monies are starting to look very, very different, all at the point of they want to save money because we're very expensive over half the state budget, but they want to save money and they want to privatize. How do you describe that to someone? And many of you have heard this. How many of you use our state parks? We are so fortunate in Indiana to have great state parks. But what if all of a sudden Alex says, state parks are bad? And Indiana's like, okay. Then they're like, okay, what do? You have to fund golf courses, you have to fund country clubs, you have to fund whatever they want. You have to fund their boats. So if all these people all of a sudden started to do privately what they want to do, I want a country club, I want to join a sailing club, and some of you are like, yeah, that's the way recreation should work. What do you think will happen to our state parks? They're shut down because they're already struggling for money. It's no different in the schools. The schools were developed for the common good of all. State parks developed for the common good of all. When you start attacking those systems, things go very, very wrong. So, on a high note, which you're like, yay, I'm going to turn this over to Cathy so she can explain some legislation, and then we will take questions.
I don't want to, no, I'm just going to, because
Okay.
I can't
We'll
take
take questions later.
Yeah. So, as Ann said, I'm a mother of 4 kids, and my last one is in high school right now. So, I started public education advocacy with the 2009 cuts that went statewide, $300 million to our education budget, and suddenly my kid's school system was losing, I think we laid off maybe 72 teachers, which was a lot, and the kids were crying because the extracurriculars were gone. The school system had to make those cuts right away. And by the way, they never put that money back into our public education system, so we've been working with that deficit ever since. And by the way, they found, under Daniels, $300 million magically appeared, but that didn't get put back into our education system some years later. So anyway, that advocacy, the personal is political, and when you have something that affects your children's school, you get involved and you start paying attention. And so we started seeing that in 2011. So when I first started, I had all 4 kids in public school, and moms like me were not paying attention to what vouchers were going to mean. What did that mean for our kids? We didn't see that in my school system. Can you read that number?
11.7.
So in the last 5 years, $11,700,000 has gone from Monroe County in an opportunity cost to vouchers. We are looking at, if you go outside and there's a QR code, you can look at your own school system and find out, if you took, wonderful Phil Downs got this data for us, but if you took all the money that is going toward vouchers and spit it back into the funding formula, that's how much my school system would have for the last 5 years. Instead, some school systems are passing referenda, or we're making bake sales. So, Indiana Coalition for Public Education is a grassroots organization that parents and retired educators put together, and we started our own chapter down in Monroe County, and that's how I got started in the advocacy at a different level. In any case, we follow legislation, we try to get people to understand that what happens at the state level affects the child in the classroom. When my kid was tiny, this one right now, who's the first generation in his new high school pathways, this year, that generation of kids had all these different pathways to get to their high school diploma. And now they're going to change that. But when he was little, like in kindergarten or first grade, they were coming home with little brochures saying, do you like dogs? Well, you might be a vet. and they were really pushing the career thing, that somehow now you like math, now you're going to be, you know, all these different things. My son came home in middle school and was like, they're saying that I would be a good, I think he said a grief counselor, but I don't want to be a grief counselor. I said, you don't have to be a grief counselor, but the school system is making you look and put yourself into what career you're going to be as a 12-year-old. So when one of the first times I spoke at the State House, all nervous, I said, my child is not college and career ready because he's a child. And stop, right? And now he is, you know, he is college and career ready because he is 18 and he's about to go out in the world. And we want our kids life ready. We want the education for the whole child. And so this whole thing, I just wanted to follow up on some of that because they're saying that this competition, which is really chipping away at the foundation of our public schools, and the most vulnerable children, by the way, are going to those public schools. Not every child has mommy at home to talk about what that brochure was in his backpack. Yeah, sometimes mommies are working multiple jobs and they're not there. And sometimes kids are living in their car and they don't care a lot about long division in the morning when they were sleeping in their car. So the most vulnerable kids are there, and the other schools that are getting this funding are not really required to get those kids. They can say you're not a good fit, or they can openly discriminate in the case of a private school. And when Jennifer was talking about ALEC, and I saw some of you writing down, American Legislative Exchange Council. There is a whole model policy for education named after us, because we are the poster child. Although I think Arizona is going to take the cake. But
Yes, they are.
yeah, they just had universal vouchers. So now everybody gets a little $7,000 or whatever, and you're supposed to go find your school. And their legislature said it was going to be, I think, like, I can't remember what they said it was, but it's about $600 million now. 80% of the education savings accounts, I think, that are going to these parents, which is just like a debit card of money, and I'm going to pay for whatever educational service I want to have, Sylvan Learning Center, or, you know, Disney Plus, because that's expanded learning. American Disney trip.
Or Disney trip.
A Disney trip, because that's our field trip, or American Girl doll, because that's history. All this funding going out without the same parameters. That's the problem here, is this isn't a fair game. They get to take the funding and they don't have to play by the same rules at all. And we should be caring very much about all children and fulfilling that promise. In any case, I wanted you to know about the American Legislative Exchange Council in case you didn't get that first part, because that's where those bills are coming from. So the bills that we have right now, usually it would be our lobbyist for ICPE. He does a wonderful job. He's our voice at the State House. He knows these bills frontwards and backwards, and I have a cheat sheet. So we can talk about them, but our biggest concern right now with ICPE, and should be everybody's concern, is that continued defunding of public education. They expanded that money, but of the extra funding that they're putting into the pot, a third of it is going to vouchers. So vouchers are really the winners in this House proposed budget right now. So it's going over to the Senate, and we want to hear, you need to contact your state senator and say, public funds belong in public schools. And they tell us, as public education advocates, that we're always whining. Well, do your job. It's in the Constitution. And they also say that, you know, that we're always, that this is all about competition, and somehow this was going to make a better product. Well, if you really had, my child's not a widget in a factory, by the way, and if you really had a factory, you would be able to look at those raw materials and pick which ones you want that are best. But instead, we're meeting children where they are when they come in the public schools, no matter what their background, no matter what their ability. And so it's not a factory model. And besides, competition involves winners and losers, and I believe that no child should be on the losing end of equal educational opportunity. Like, that's unfair. is the one that's really something to be concerned about. But it basically rewards private and charter schools. And they're trying to find a back way to get our property taxes. If you saw those commercials that Jennifer was talking about, we need to be caring about Andy because he's going to the school that doesn't get the same amount. They want to say that charter schools are public schools, and they are in law sometimes, but charter schools are publicly funded schools. They're free to the parent if you can get into the lottery, if you're around when they call your name, if you can provide the transportation. But they are privately run. So they are, and there are all kinds of problems. You can look it up. Network for Public Education had a report about charter schools and the grift, and how much money did we lose on our virtual charter school here that we're still waiting to get that funding back. 145 million, it's in court. This reminds me of that Dr. Seuss book of Mr. Monkey McBean, come into my star-off machine. Here's the brand new shiny school that will do a better job. And then whoops, this didn't really work. So my accountability is as the market, when your child comes to that school, shut the door. And it's not here anymore. It's the whim of the market. And then Mr. McMonkey Bean leaves with his star-off machine and all the dollars falling out of it. So, yeah, well, maybe on the banned list. Yeah. So, anyway, no, it's not. Okay, so the budget bill is one that we need to be very, very concerned about, because when they talk about now that they're making it so public schools can't charge parents anymore for books and school supplies. And I have to tell you, as the mother of 4, that was a hefty price that I was paying for my kids. And that doesn't equate, like, why am I cutting box tops or bringing boxes of Kleenex into our schools where they're siphoning this funding away? Why is it that we have to try to bring pens and papers and all that kind of thing? But anyway, they're going to say, now we can't charge as a public school system anymore, charge you for those books. But they're not necessarily putting the money in to give to us to pay for that. So when we're going to have to use the general fund to take that money out to pay for those books. And then you take that and you take the voucher money and you start cutting into that, and we talk about the cost of inflation, and that budget is not going to move the needle. And we're in the middle of a teacher shortage, right? Like, we should be caring a lot about who's educating our children, all our children. Like, some of my friends are like, whew, I'm so glad my kids aren't in school anymore. Yeah, but your neighbor's kids are, and this is about the world you want for them. This is about everybody being able to have an educated society so that the doctor that I go see is well educated and can take care of me. All right, so 391. This is, in Indiana we have another ALEC law, which is if your school building, your public school building, is not utilized that much, you have to sell it to a charter school for $1 if they want it. Yes, that's been around for a long time, friends. So I'm glad you know it now. Yes. So for $1, but now this is trying to, because they want those buildings. By the way, there's nothing that gives it back to public, right? Our tax dollars pay for public buildings for the good of all. So it's a continued theme. They want to take those buildings. And when one of the legislators was asking in committee, well, what if the charter school is not completely being utilized? Because like, if it's for storage, it has to be more than 50% used, and if it's for educational purposes, it can't be less than 60% used. What about the charter schools? Well, that doesn't count for them. Right? Some of these charter schools do not make the same, they say they're going to have 300 kids, and then they have, about that, I don't know. So that is going through. Again, public funds, public entities are for the public, for all. There's no, we need to have those, there are laws about open transparency and accountability to the public with our public funds in public schools that are not there for privately run and private schools in general. We're worried that the savings account is going to get slipped into the bill, so look for that. Tell them no education savings account. It was SB 305, it died, but you know what happens here? We have zombie bills. They die and they rise again from somewhere else. Slipped into the budget, put in the language of it into something else. So you have to always be looking, and it's whack-a-mole. Every year we're just hitting those moles, trying to make legislation less bad. 398 died, that's good. Where's the next one? SB 12. This is the banning books bill. Now in my school district, we have processes in place. I have had the experience in my kids' middle school where one of my friends was really uncomfortable with her child at that point in his development reading the book. And so she went to the teacher and she went to the principal and they worked with her. There are these processes in place, but what this does is it puts fear into the classroom. It puts fear into the heart of the teachers and the librarians. And so it also is removing the protection for teachers. It used to be that you had a protection in the law that you're disseminating this information for educational purposes, and that sort of protected you from a felony. Well, that is what this bill takes away. So I think it's interesting because we don't have full-time librarians in every school. If we had a teacher librarian in every school, imagine A, the literacy, and B, the ability to call those collections and make sure that we had great books for our kids. So, SB 12, no. And then, sorry, see that? I think that's probably, I'm forgetting the...
There's just quite a few out there for
don't say...
The LGBT.
1608.
Yeah.
Yes. I was at the State House when there were hundreds of people in their rainbows trying to say, please do not, silence our kids and create this fear. The bill was originally written to ban instruction about gender in K-3 classrooms, including all the different gender fluidity and stereotypes and so forth. Then they had it amended on February 20th, and now it's about, it's supposed to ban any talk of human sexuality or anything like in K through 3. So some of that kind of instruction was like good touch, bad touch, and stuff like that if they had it. But it also requires that the school staff only use a name or pronoun that differs from the child's biological sex with written consent from the parents. And it requires the school to notify parents if the child requests change. And it says that a school may not discipline a staff member for using a name or pronoun consistent with the child's legal name or biological sex. So this is sort of like telling on kids that are transgender, and a lot of kids are not feeling safe to be who they are at home, and so it allows them to be able to be with a safe adult and who they are. So it's just another...
There's just a few more I want to bring your attention to. One, for years, educators, the administrators have had discussions with teachers, and I always felt like it was healthy because they were the boots on the ground. They were the ones that were saying, are the kids acting crazy? Is this program working? Are these class sizes just out of control? Do we need a different format in this programming? Do we need a different sequence in our curriculum? It was healthy discussion. Rarely do I run into a superintendent or a teacher organization, whoever's representing the teachers, to say, hey, that's really going badly. I mean, bargaining at the table sometimes gets a little dicey. Been there, done that. But discussions, I always appreciated discussions. And so there is now a bill that would prohibit schools from having discussions with the teachers, which that is good for 0 kids in my opinion, but that's one that's still out there. Another one that is very concerning is a DCS child protection bill. This places limits on how DCS can intervene if there's child abuse within the family. So before, if we knew there were child abuse in the family, we had the duty to report. So we would call DCS and say, hey, we think this child, they said something, or we see marks or whatever, and we think they're in danger. Well, DCS could intervene if they thought, because you don't know if it's coming from the family, you don't know where that abuse is coming from, or if it's abuse. That's why you have people who investigate. This would limit the intervention of DCS with the family knowledge, and I'm telling you, if you've ever been at that school level, you know how dangerous that can be for certain kids, because the abusers are the very ones that they're trying to protect over the kid. So, not in all cases, but my question is, how about funding DCS the way it needs to be funded versus playing games like that? The teacher handgun training is coming back. I think there's only 2 schools in Indiana that even have their teachers, or not even teachers, but their staff that are carrying at this point. But the teacher, they're paying for training for weapons. Pretty much all the law enforcement spoke out against that because it's such a bad idea. Plus, now I'm not anti-SROs being armed, but with teachers, here's the other thing too. The law enforcement was, first of all, there's a lot of data on this, but the law enforcement were also saying this isn't a one and done. This is every week, every other week type of training. So if there is a situation, someone knows what they're doing with that weapon. The other one is we've heard from a lot of law enforcement, if they go in and there's an active shooter, they're shooting whomever has a gun. Good guy, bad guy. So they're saying, I don't know how that teacher's going to convince that person in that moment, hey, look, I'm a teacher and I'm just carrying. Are they going to believe you? Or are they going to take you out? So there's a lot of pieces to that, which obviously the gentleman carrying, he loves his gun bills, but he's got that one again. And yeah. I think that's it. I think those are the biggies. There are obviously a lot, so I think we're ready for questions.
But the thing I was going to say, I think, and somebody would have to watch it back, so I don't know for sure, but I thought I had read, so take it with a grain of salt, because I don't want to be quoted that I said this, but when that bill was being said about we're going to pay for teacher training if they're carrying guns, or whoever the staff is, the state will pay for it, somebody said, well, can we make sure that parents, it's a parent's right, the parents know if the teacher is carrying a gun, and that amendment failed. So if that's true, I think that parent rights is only going one way here with that, kissing whatever they think needs to be parents' rights, but anyway.
If you have a card with your question, would you pass it down to your right? And we have some people that are collecting the cards. They're on this side.
I also wanted to say there was some good news. There's a bill that died, and it was 1428, and it would require school boards to be partisan. That was a terrible, against it. I am really, really glad, because really, you know, Republican and Democrat, we love our children, we love our public schools, and if people want to run for school board, then they should be able to do so without party platform. They should be part of the community, so that was a good thing.
You forgot Senate Bill 480 against sending children to a professional doctor or counseling for gender change.
Oh, yeah.
This was in the paper today.
That's right.
What is that?
Yeah, that one passed. It's a gender affirming treatment. I know what happened was they really went after Riley Children's Hospital, and Riley came back and said basically what you're saying are not practices that we are not healthcare that we're practicing. There are for transgender youth or LGBTQ, the bill, I think I even have cheat sheets on it. It was to mention 3 things, if I remember correctly. It was the gender-affirming surgery, hormone therapy, and puberty blockers for minors. And so the parents who spoke up for the bill were talking about their parental rights. So you as an individual may not agree with any of that, but a lot of people are like, why is that your business? Like, if there is a parent who says, it's my child, it's my right to make those decisions. So the same very people that are saying, we want parent rights for school choice, we want parent rights for books, we want parent blah, 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 except for if you're LGBTQ, then those parent rights seem to not matter. So there were a lot of people that spoke out against that bill. Our other concern with that is the suicide rate for our LGBTQ is 3 times higher than the national average. And so for people who are like, you know what, it doesn't matter, and that's just rhetoric, yada, yada, you be in those schools and deal with it. It is not just rhetoric. It is daily operations in schools where where kids are struggling and they need some of that assistance, and we work with their families. It's not like we're trying to cover anything up. We are working with families, we're working with the individual, but when the government gets in the way of that, it creates all kinds of problems. So the attack on that particular population this year is really, really, first of all, it's disgusting, it's frustrating, it's sad to watch, but also this very people that are all about parental rights and our freedoms and our liberties, unless you're LGBTQ, you shouldn't have any. That's the message that's coming out of that State House right now. I remember when I ran for office and I was on Twitter and somebody looked at my Twitter account and said, hey, there is a group at your school that follows you, and it was like an LGBTQ support group. You need to unfollow them. I said, absolutely not. They are students in our building. It was students who were identified LGBTQ and didn't identify LGBTQ. They were all friends, they were all supportive, and they were trying to educate each other on just their lives and better understanding, and it was very healthy. There were a lot of parents that were very supportive of it, but that's where we are, picking and choosing who has support and when they have it. And that's where that government overreach, those folks who are saying they don't believe in government overreach are the best ones at it.
Here's the easiest question tonight, and it's what bill numbers were you mentioning for discussion? If you could A, repeat those, or B, and if you want to plug a commercial that this will be posted online on Facebook. Is that right?
That's right. You can re-watch this on the Indiana Coalition for Public Education Northeast Facebook page, so it will be on there. If you want to know, maybe stay afterwards. Also check out the Indiana Coalition for Public Education website. They have a blog where they highlight important issues, big State House notes, as well as joining ICPE. There's flyers out there to do that, and it's only $25, but you will receive them the emails with big State House notes and any alerts and things like that to what legislation you need to be aware of, and so you can write your legislators.
Here are the biggies that I've been told as far as bad House bills. First of all, you got the budget bill, 1001. It's always 1001. But 1008 is the anti-ESG bill, which is that retirement pension. 1177 is the handgun training for teachers. 1407, DCS, child protection bill. 1608 is we call it the Don't Say Gay bill. It's the Florida bill. It's the ALEC bill. 12 is the censor bill with the book bans. 350, we didn't mention this, is the bans on municipalities cannot ban conversion therapy. So they don't have that. There are some cities or towns that have banned that, and now they say you can't. Again, anti-LGBTQ. 480 is the LGBTQ, the gender-affirming surgery, hormone therapy, and puberty blockers. And then 486 is the deregulation bill, which is the one you can't discuss anymore with school administrators, where teachers can't discuss.
Okay, what is they can't discuss?
They can't, there was,
The question is, what can't they discuss?
The law before was working conditions, and it's been really watered down. It's pretty much working conditions. Like, you could talk about anything you really want to talk about that impacted their working conditions, and so now you can't discuss. So it was really about the operations of the school is what it boiled down to.
It meant that the teachers had a voice at the table
Yeah,
when they were making changes. And it used to be, like in other states that have stronger union support, they can say, they can bargain on working conditions like this class size is too big and so forth. We can't do that, but at least you could be, that they would have at the table with the administration talking about an issue that was concerning, and they had a legal right to do that. And this is taking away that right to discussion.
So moving on, the next easy one is one of you mentioned a public report. that they'll bring in the meeting, where might somebody find that state report, the public copy?
Are you talking about, there's the choice report, the DOE, just plug in Indiana choice report, and it's every year school choice report. So if you go to the Department of Education, good luck finding their website now, but if you could find it, and then you go to the Indiana choice report, plug in the year. Now always they're a year behind because not at the fault of anybody, it's just how the data flows.
Next question, doesn't school choice provide different learners a smaller school environment more appropriate to meet their needs, especially needs such as AED, ASD, and SPD?
So
I guess
Yeah.
that's the question.
So, I'm a parent, and I'm not going to point fingers at people for making that choice. The difference is that we're now funding with our public tax dollars private choice. And actually, you know, if you're taking funding from the public schools over to a private school because you like that small class size, it's not like it's a neat loss of funding and we just close down one classroom and we're all good. But you still have to pay teachers, you still have to have the lights on, you still have to pay programming. So you might lose a kid from here and from there, and then they go over there. So the class sizes might grow, actually, in the public school as they lose increasing amounts of funding to private choice. So it is sort of that kind of loss. But the other thing is, too, is when you go over to a private school, those teachers are not required to be certified. They may not have, they may be had an English BA or something like that, but they don't necessarily understand how children learn and what those practices are. And special ed, you lose your rights when you go to a private school. You lose your child. The money may follow the child, but the child's rights do not follow.
You lose all federal protections, so your Title IX, your special ed, your EL, which is English language learners, you lose all of those protections, and so many of those schools either don't offer it or then send that child to partner with the public school. In the long run, they're right back with us for a lot of those services. So they lose all federal protections, which is, for many of our kids, yeah, it's detrimental.
Yeah, one more thing I'd like to add to that is that people don't realize that it becomes a revolving door for the public schools, because when someone cannot, or the private schools or the homeschool people cannot fit the bill to really do the job of education, or the behaviors the child has are such that the private schools or what have you don't want to deal with it, then they come back. And I literally, at the last school I had, a family come back, and God love the woman who took in the 2 nephews, but when we tested them, literally the 11-year-old was only reading about 1st grade level and the 9-year-old was recognizing alphabet, and the 5-year-old was recognizing alphabet. You know how they learned it? From Sesame Street. And I'm not kidding you, this goes on all the time. And people are not aware of the revolving door that we have to pick these kids up and try to teach them after they've not gotten taught or whatever has gone on. Okay.
And we also have a disability advocate in the audience, and they're asking the ESA that passed this year, they don't believe has been it's been promoted well but not run well. So the question is, how can we get Hoosier families to understand that expanding the program is not in the child's best interest? And let me couple that, because there's a few other questions. How do we stop the steal of professional educators? How do we mobilize? So I'd like Cathy, you as an advocate for a long time, to talk about how you've been and seen successful, not always, but successful mobilization and argument. And then Jennifer, as a former elected official, what was effective talking points to you when constituents or groups like Cathy came up and talked, or opposites of Cathy even? How could they present themselves to be effective?
Well, I don't think we need to cast aspersions at people for making different choices for their family. We've always had choice. It's about the fact that that funding goes over there and it doesn't have the same guardrails on it. And so I think that that's at least, a lot of people say, well, choice is here to stay, and it clearly is for maybe my lifetime, but I would say that we can still push for accountability. If you look at what Senator Mishler just sent out to his constituents in the state, he had the direct experience through people close to him in a voucher school where they could do something that was not in the best interest of their family and the child in particular, and there were no guardrails. They had no recourse for it, and that's not what's in the best interest for kids. We should be what's in the best interest for kids.
Excuse me, that was my question, and it's broader than that. My point is, how did the legislature, in general, steal educators' agency in this state? I mean, it's been a process, evidently, but evidently, we're not effective in stopping that steal of our agency, choosing curriculum. I used to be on textbook committees, and we were respected. They followed it.
The narrative.
Teachers were respected. They're disrespected today.
Yeah, so there is a tremendous amount of money that is flowing. I mean, obviously, when I was in office, I was responsible for $9 billion. We're over half of the state budget, and then you throw federal money in. The first step that they did was remove as many guardrails from that money as possible, which is crazy, because I know there are some Republicans in this room. And if I ask you, you're like, I'm Republican because, you know, I'm fiscally conservative, I'm fiscally responsible, and you have your reasons, which is all fine and dandy. They're the least fiscally responsible people at that state house right now that I've ever seen. If I'm the most fiscally responsible, there's a problem. Yeah. However, it's a money flow. So when you look at the charters, when you look at the voucher program, there's no accountability, true accountability for the money that's flowing. So when that happens, there's a lot of money and a lot of power that is being gained quickly. They're also following a playbook that is also bringing them a lot of money and a lot of power. So it's all about that. And when that happens, the same group of people that also have a lot of money and a lot of power have the means to do what they've done. And when you're sitting there staring at a teacher, groups of teachers who make $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 for years, and they were a lot of times frozen, they don't have the means to fight it, they don't have the knowledge to fight it, their time is a problem, and they knew all that. It was very purposeful in using the leverage of the almighty dollar. That's what it's about. So when you're paying your tax dollars and assuming that there's transparency and accountability, there is if you're in a traditional public school. There is not if you're in a charter environment or a private environment. That's how they started it, and it's just accelerated because we will never keep up with the monies. Ever. There is so much money flowing, and Arizona and Indiana are the two biggies. Yep. And everybody in the nation knows it. I go across the nation, they're like, you guys have lost your minds. I'm like, you think? You think? But it also goes back to, I talk to teachers, I talk to administrators, I talk to public school supporters that vote against their own interests because there's a lack of understanding of what's happening. They also then took it a step further and knew they were crushing it as far as we don't have teachers, teachers are all bailing. Well, they're also watching this experiment of choice and going, these results are looking really bad and this is a reflection on us. But instead of attacking the problem and making sure that we're paying teachers more and getting people retained and attracting people into it, they stripped the requirements. And now in Indiana, you don't even have to have a high school diploma to be a teacher. No, you don't even have to have a high school diploma. Now you have the gate. The gate are the school board members. They're the keepers, right? And your superintendents and your principals. But they've gone the other way. So everything they're doing is nonsensical. But when they do that, and you're thinking, how does that make sense? Why would they strip the teachers so that you have very incompetent folks that maybe are in those classrooms? They have great intentions. They have no business. If you barely graduate from high school and you're telling me you can teach calculus, you go teach physics. I mean, right now, go teach 7th grade math. I hear parents all the time go, I can't do that math anymore. But yet we're telling high school people with a high school diploma, and there are a lot of smart people with high school diploma. I'm not saying that. But there are a lot of them that need further training, not just for the content, but for the pedagogy and classroom management. There's so much more to it. But they've done it through the means of stripping people of money. I'm going to explain to you how the charters work, and I know Noah's got a big card full of, or a handful of cards, but it's important that you understand how just this one concept works with charters. So I'm going to use Cathy. She would not do this, but I'm going to use her. I'm going to say Cathy's going to start a charter school. And she would come to me at the DOE and she would say, I'm going to start a charter school next school year. This is the spring, right? So it's about this time of the year. And I'm going to have 200 kids. I'm like, okay. So the DOE would say you're going to have 200 kids. We would start, this is the law, we would start funding that school on 200 kids because she told us that was the projection. Now this is how this works, folks. Pay attention. Then she would come to us and say, hey, I got this building for $1 and it's a mess. And so I need a common school loan so I can get technology and I can get some things done with my building. So then the state goes, okay, based on a formula, we will give you a common school loan. So Cathy's got the money for the 200 kids, and now she's got a common school loan from the state of Indiana. So fast forward, school starts, and we're underway, and she comes to us, and Cathy says, hey, we didn't get 200 kids. We got 20. If that were to happen to traditional public schools, we have to give the money back through our monthly reimbursement of what they give us. They shore it up. We don't control that. They just withhold the money and they shore it up. For Cathy, that doesn't happen. Because the rules are different, the guardrails are different, the political money and power flow is different. So Cathy's got a nice little set of cash here, and then she comes to us and is like, you know what, those 20 kids, I just can't get it done. I'm going to have to close my doors. Guess how many times Indiana has gone after those dollars? 0. Where does that money go, folks? Florida, ALEC, campaigns. It's a vicious cycle. But get this, then Cathy comes next year. This is the important part that's happening in Indiana. Cathy comes back next year and says, hey, my little first school, Cathy 1.0, didn't go so well. I'm going to start Cathy 2.0, and guess what? The cycle starts all over again. In the meantime, my school has cut art and music and PE and drama and speech and driver's ed and ag because the money only goes so far. The pot of money only goes so far. And when it's abused, because there are no guardrails and there are no expectations of follow through, it's a problem. When I was at the department, I would turn all those dollar amounts to our AG. I would turn it over to the governor's office, and I would turn it over to the House and the Senate leadership because I was like, someone needs to go after these dollars. And they were like, you know what? We don't like you anymore. I was like, thank God. But really, that's what we're up against. That's what we're up against, and that's wrong. I don't care who you are and what school your child attends, that is wrong. So those very people that are saying, preaching fiscal conservativeness, that's the game they're playing. And I do not call that being fiscally conservative. I call that being fiscally selfish. That's what that is.
Okay, next question. In reference to SB 12, as a parent, don't you think they have the right to object to a vote they may not think is appropriate for their child? Why is SB 12 wrong in that vein that a parent should have a right or a say in what their child can do or read?
Well, you have a right, I'll say, as a mom, you have a right to say you don't want that book read by your child, but you do not have the right to tell me what my child is.
think, to point out that.
Well, and
You're
there's
not
already-
wrong, but there's processes, as you said.
They're already in process. They're in our school policy, they're already in our guidelines. We have been working with parents on this for years and years and years. As a first-year teacher, I remember we read a novel and the parent came in and was very concerned because I was in a very small rural school and there was a black character. And she was like, my child's not gonna read that because there was a black character. I was like, what? But we worked with the parent, the child ended up staying with us and reading the book, but there was a process that we had a conversation, and it worked well. Sometimes it's maybe, okay, we respect that. If you don't want your child to read it, we'll give you an alternative assignment or something else to work on. It's been going on for years, but for a small group of people, and the people who want them to like them in the State House, to dictate what the entire state of Indiana's children are reading is just wrong. It's exactly what Cathy said. I mean, if you don't want your child to read it, fine, but don't tell the rest of us what's good for our own kids. Yeah.
Next question, how does a ban on HB 1608 on teaching human sexuality work with current Indiana curriculum law that requires age-appropriate instruction on child sex abuse?
What's the number again?
HB 1608 on
And
teaching human sexuality.
The Indiana Code provision is IC 20-30-5-5.7, which says, as of December 15th of 2020, we're supposed to be instructing K through 12 at an age-appropriate level, instruction on child abuse and child sexual abuse to students. How does that work with?
That'd be a great question for your son.
That is a great
What you will find as some of these bills get further and further catering to the 3 to 5% of people who are very disruptive. When those bills continue to do that, there are a lot of conflicts with other bills. Here's the other problem too, and let's face it, you've got teachers in those classrooms that now, every day, every lesson, every piece of material they use, are going to have to think, is this at risk? And then it becomes it depends on how someone defines that material being harmful. And you're looking at a level 5 felony, level 5 I think it was, 5 or 6. Then you question, and I know having been a teacher, I'm like, would I do that? Like, would I want to teach under that environment? And I hope our teachers stick this out, because this too shall pass, and it's going to be painful for a while. But why, I just think about, why would a teacher and a librarian go to work every day for the purpose of serving our kids and have to worry about being a felon? Like, are they going to stick it out? That's the question. And all of us know, as goes the quality of the teacher, so goes Indiana. And that's the reality of it.
Come back here.
Sorry, switching sides of the room. Any other questions? Jorge, Fernanda, do you have a comment on HB 44?
Yeah, and actually, it's SB 486, the collective bargaining, as like clarification. I think it means that you can't, or that they're not required, school districts are not required to discuss changes in working conditions with teachers' unions, which it's still not good. Shall to may provision. So it's not banning them from discussing, and I think that school districts like Fort Wayne Community Schools will continue discussing it, but there's no other requirement, and I don't think that's good practice, but I think just as clarification, I think that's what.
This goes back farther than that, because when they, years ago, lost a lot of their rights to bargain for the school board, to talk about anything, I mean, you put a clamp right there, because the function of the union now is totally different than it was a few years ago, okay? So don't dismiss what we're saying.
Yeah, and the 2011 changes where they said they can't bargain it, I don't, even if they wanted to, I don't think they can bargain, but now it's like discussion, I think, is to a may, I don't think it's banning them from talking.
I think this is a great point, because there's so much time being spent on, this is a perfect example. This is not critical of anyone in this room, but this is a perfect example of the State House spending time on things that aren't issues. And there is a laundry list of bills that are seeking out problems. Because there's just a lot of anti-bills going through, and when people are pushed on the bill, it's no different than the book banning. When people are really pushed on what books are you referring to, they really can't give you a whole lot. And the ones they do give you, they really can't tell you where they came from. I mean, it's like, it really is a use of time that is being diverted from real issues. So do not lose sight of, we still are not solving the problem of childcare. We're still not solving the problem of pre-K. We still have a state that has a crisis in mental health and substance abuse. My roads are still craters. I mean, it's like the biggies that are really hard and complex to solve are being diverted by these little piddly things that aren't even problems. They create issues for all of us, and it makes us mad, and it gets our focus, but they really aren't our problems. Those are not Indiana's real problems. Our LGBTQ kids are not hurting anyone. They're not hurting anyone. However, no one wants to have a conversation about safe gun storage, and we have kids killed every week.
Okay, we're still on SB 12. I'm going to combine a couple questions if that's okay. It's been seen in the media and around, and one parent has seen where there's pretty pornographic content in books in their children's school with sex with animals, objects, other parts. We've seen them on the media, and there's probably some truth to that. Is that literary values we need for our children to read? And then also, in a follow-up to that, how, Jennifer, I will ask this part to you, as a former superintendent, how are books determined to be age appropriate and school library appropriate? Who decides that? How is that determined?
So let me go to the first question about the book that everybody keeps saying. That's the same book that people are seeing in Florida. It's the same book that people are seeing in Arizona. When you push someone to say, what library did that come from and why didn't you address it with that school, you have a responsibility too. There's really no good answer to that. I will tell you, there isn't a superintendent in the state of Indiana, if someone came to us with a really graphic book and said this was in your library, you better believe that there would be a discussion about and an investigation about that book. There just would be. There are ways and processes already in place. Here's the other thing. This very same people used to come to my office when I was a state superintendent. Very same people. Now they've kind of spun off, but very same initial group would say, do you know why there's libraries in a classroom? And I would say, yes. I do. Because I was a special ed teacher and a language arts teacher, and I am very aware of why I had my own individual library in my classroom. I also know too, I bought most of those books on my own, or families would donate gently used books because they knew what we were trying to do with an in-class library. Yes. And they said, no, that is where the teachers hide their porn. I was like, now if anybody followed me in office, I really had trouble filtering. So that's when the team knew we were in trouble, because you know, you just kind of have that, really? Are you really that dumb? Like, really? I mean, who believes that? But there are individuals that do and have been convinced that we are one big pornographic institution. Now, are there books in libraries that need to be reviewed? Yes, there's a process for that. How do books get into a library? Typically, it depends on the school, so I'm not saying this is true for every school, but there is a process between the librarian, a librarian, maybe sometimes an aide under the umbrella of the librarian, the principal, a teacher committee, parents are sometimes involved. We also have to deal with the issue of sometimes you have lexiles because a kid's reading ability is really, really high, but yet you're watching content and doing that can be really tricky. So it's not a real clean-cut thing. We've also used universities to help with that. because they have reading specialists and many of us couldn't afford that. So there's more to it. There's also lists of curriculums that we follow that's state approved. There's also lists of books that tell us age appropriateness that have been reviewed by national people who know way more than most people who have been trained in education. So there's a lot of ways you follow that. It's not like you just, here you go. We also at times will have students come to us and say, hey, I am super excited about this new book that Michael Jordan put out about himself. And would you look at it? And so sometimes we would take the request of a student to say, sure, we'll take a look at that and see if we can get it in for you so we can have it in the library. Same thing that happens in a public library. But there is a process. And is it perfect? No. But to paint the picture the way it's been painted is for one purpose: disruption. One purpose: disruption. And for anybody to tell you there's other purposes to that, they're not dealing with it appropriately. If it's really about helping kids, you deal with it at the local level where it's a problem and have the conversation. And if you don't like the answer to those conversations, there's other ways to deal with it. But to be disruptive at board meetings, to be disruptive and call the teacher names, to label teachers groomers, to have the legislators calling us groomers, to say there's porn in all these libraries and all these schools. How is that helping kids? How is that helping kids? That is one big disruption. But I will tell you, when you go to the meetings that a lot of them go to, and the playbook is privatization, they know exactly what they want you to say. They know exactly who they want to say it and who would be willing to say it and how to say it and how disruptive they can be. I've never heard of a community that had disruption in it that things ended well for them. Ever. Ever. It's how you handle that is a reflection of a community. And I get it's emotional, it can get fiery, but in the big scheme of things, handling it in an appropriate way to actually, if there is a problem, to solve the problem versus you becoming the problem. And there's a big difference. And no one's fooling anybody. Everybody knows what's going on. But there is a process. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I am not saying it's perfect. But there is a process. You want to help improve the process? Don't go to board meetings and act like a fool. That doesn't help processes. There are appropriate ways to handle this. And I know everybody in this room probably handles it appropriately. I'm just saying, when you hear about things that happen like that in your local schools, please keep in mind that 99% of the people don't act like fools at board meetings, and they handle that stuff appropriately. I just don't want everybody to be lumped into that. It's the same thing as calling every educator a groomer.
With that, I'll turn it back over to Ann. It's after 7:30 and close up.
Thank you. I have one announcement. There's a legislator town hall breakfast on Saturday, March 11th from 8:30 to 11. This is sponsored by the Legislative Action Team for ISTA, Fort Wayne Educators Association, East Allen County Educators Association, and Southwest Allen County Educators Association. Everyone is invited, and it is at the FWEA building, 3711 Rupp Drive in Suite 207. And it is very close, right next door to the Hall Triangle Park. So you're probably familiar with that. Saturday, March 11th at 8:30. So feel free to see what your legislators have to say about some of the issues we've talked about tonight. And
Will that be in the paper?
will that be in the paper? Yeah.
I don't know. I may not be on Facebook and all that.
Okay, so you could find anything on Facebook.
If anyone wants to sign up to be on, or to get any information like that from us, we can make sure that we put it out by email to us.
And
The website of this organization.
I also wanted to kind of talk about the ICPE, Indiana Coalition for Public Education. I mentioned that the membership is $25. ICPE is our umbrella organization that Jennifer is a chair for, and board member, and Cathy is the president. And then they are umbrella organizations underneath ICP. There's an ICPE Monroe County, ICPE Northwest, and then here we have ICP Northeast. So if you want to join ICPE to receive their information and help for their help fund their lobbying at the State House and various things that they do, and that's great, but you can also become active in the ICPE Northeast, but you need to mention that on your application that you'd like additional information, and they can send that to you or get ICPE Northeast your information as well, so you can help advocate for public schools. Also wanted to thank our cookie bakers. I'm sure there's plenty out there, so please help yourself on the way.
Money will be given to the public school.
And also, of course, thank you to Cathy and Jennifer. We appreciate you coming all out.
I just want to thank everyone for being so, involved, and please continue to write, call, text, email, whatever you choose to do, but do follow these things, because this is not the time to be sitting on our laurels and, passing the buck to hope that it gets done. It's not going to get done unless we do it. And I keep saying, I'll go to my grave and I'll say, she tried to get public education funded on my tombstone. All right, thank you for coming.
Congratulations, by the way. Thank you very much. We followed every one of your campaigns, and until we finally achieved what we wanted.
We did. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.